everybody, I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Stacy Kauk, who is the head of sustainability at Shopify. Stacy, good to see you. I want to start with how you define your job, because sustainability is one of those words that people are using very differently depending on which company they're in.
Definitely. So as the head of sustainability at Shopify, that really is everything that falls in the E bucket of ESG, really climate focused because of the nature of our business. So I'm responsible for our corporate carbon accounting and emissions reduction strategy, our renewable energy program. We also have a sustainability fund that spends a minimum of $5 million every year on the most promising solutions to reverse climate change. We can dive into that because that's a fun bucket, as well as partnerships and initiatives that help our customers, because we have millions of merchants in over 175 countries around the world. We have a unique position as a platform to help them find solutions to fight climate change within their business. So that's also part of the mandate.
So you are the first person in this role, and I think one of the fascinating things in any new, leadership role is basically it was a green field, no pun intended. Where do you start? I mean, give me a sense of how do you even build a team? Who are the first people you hire besides yourself?
Yeah. And so maybe to set the table a little bit, how my role in hiring came around was there was a bubbling up within Shopify wanting to, quantify our historical emissions and be accountable and drive some emissions reductions as well. And they had figured out what the footprint was, and then it was like, oh well, we should go buy some offsets to be accountable for it. And then
does that mean like buying tracts of forest basically, or investing
in basically we talk about it in terms of buying credits from a project that pays somebody else to not pollute what we just did. So from the atmosphere's perspective, you're not pulling your emissions out, you're actually just paying for technology or processes to be adopted by another company so that they don't emit the same amount that you did.
Right.
So that offset piece. And like back in 2018, 2019, that was what everybody was doing. And then there were some fundamental first principle questions that were asked by our CEO. And it was like, well, why would we pay somebody else to use technology that's readily available? Why would we want to not support something like carbon removal, which has capture from the air and then long-term storage where we're actually able to net out our emissions? And so all of these questions started happening, and it was like, okay, well, Shopify wants to buy carbon removal, not a traditional offset. And then it was a trip out into the market, which they thought was a market at the time, and a quick discovery that there really wasn't much available, and what was available was extremely expensive and largely in labs and academic settings. And so that was the genesis of the creation of my role, because our CEO decided, let's use market forces. We're a commerce company, so let's be that demand signal and say, hey, this is what we want to buy. It's not readily available, but we're going to commit to spend at least $5 million every year buying high quality carbon removal. So that happened, and then it was a question of, well, what does that look like, and how do you build a program and build a team to achieve that objective? Like, how are you going to screen your projects?
So who was the first person you hired? Or who,
so
how big? Yeah, go ahead.
The first person hired was me. And so I have a different background than, I haven't done sustainability at a private company before. My background, I'm an environmental engineer, so I love technology. I've been out working with different industrial clients over my career, designing pollution protection and environmental control systems and things like that. But then I also worked for the Canadian government at the Department of Environment for 10 years on policy and regulatory initiatives. So I know what it takes to get new technologies built and adopted and brought to market with protecting the environment as a core tenet. So it's a weird background, but it actually makes me the right individual to be able to see, to do that scientific and engineering due diligence on something like direct air capture, but then also understand what policy landscapes required in order for that to be successful, like what kind of tax breaks are needed, what kind of environmental controls and community engagement is required to do this responsibly. So bringing that meant that we needed to then build out the team in a way that gave us capacity to do this at scale. But also, I really needed folks that understood Shopify's business.
So these are technical people, and I mean, how big is the team now? And it's actually, it's probably not a good question, because in some ways the size of a team does not reflect the impact you can make. So let me pivot a second to your government experience, because we always talk about what the private sector can bring to the public sector, you know, more of a business focus, ROI. We rarely talk about what experience in the public sector can bring to the private sector. Besides understanding the regulatory landscape, are there other qualities from working in government that you think are very helpful in this role and just in general in, you know, private sector success?
Definitely. So one of the aspects of my career with the government that was an honor, I represented Canada at the United Nations doing multilateral negotiations on different environmental agreements. And multilateralism and that negotiating and compromise and deal brokering has served me very well in this role. And the reason for that, it goes two ways. One is being able to understand what these nascent carbon removal companies need, and being able to go talk about that with other parts of the ecosystem to try to create those conditions. But one of the big takeaways that I had about 2 years into this role is that operating alone, Shopify by itself, is not going to have as big an impact as collaborating with other buyers in the carbon removal space. So we ended up founding Frontier, which is $1 billion market commitment with Stripe, Alphabet, Meta, and McKinsey Sustainability. And I use those same negotiating and multilateral skills in forming that partnership, because we're all very different companies. We all have very different objectives, but we have to come together with that one mission and make sure that everyone can do that in their own way. And so it really reminded me of negotiating at the UN with, you know, the EU or, you know,
nobody moves until everybody's on board, right? It's very different than the command and control. I'm the CEO, and it's because I said so. I mean, well, with Frontier, because that's one of the reasons I really did. I'm eager to talk to you. I mean, talk about that particular mission. I know there's always concern when people come together about antitrust. That's not the case here. Is it about establishing best practices? Is it about tell me what the mission is of Frontier and how that's helped you in your job?
So for Shopify, founding Frontier alongside all those other companies was really about two things. One, we wanted to put a bigger dollar value behind a demand signal that was clearly defined. What is high quality carbon removal? What do we expect in terms of monitoring, measuring, reporting, and verification? What do we expect in terms of environmental justice and community engagement for those projects? And so by combining forces and putting a bigger dollar sign behind that than we could by ourselves, it gives us a bigger megaphone to help actually shape the market. So that was one piece. And then the other part of it is, you know, the buying carbon removal is not something you can just go out and do. It's not like buying an offset from that market that's been around for 20 years. This is evolving. And what it means is that it's a lot of, you know, Shopify, the buyer, negotiating directly with the carbon removal supplier, which is often a very small startup, often just come out of perhaps a university or academic setting. And that's very intensive. So if a supplier has to negotiate with their first 10 buyers directly, that's taking up bandwidth away from them focusing on de-risking their technology and scaling. And what Frontier does is it's a buyers group. So it brings together a lot of buyers in one window for suppliers. So it's streamlining that procurement process and reducing a lot of toil that can happen in that space. And so what I hope from this is that it gives, a very clear signal to, like, this is what we're going to buy, but also here's an easy way to access your customers.
It's the role that you're in. It's interesting as to whether sustainability is something that drives business growth or as a cost center, maybe a bit of both. What is it from where you sit, and how is it evolving? Because especially when times are tough, the things that are cost centers tend to be first to go.
Definitely. So at Shopify, when we became a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange, our CEO, who also was the one who created the initial spend commitment for carbon removal, he penned a letter and it said, yes, we're going to be listed on the stock exchange. Yes, you're going to be looking for quarter over quarter results. But what Shopify is actually on a mission to do is make commerce better for everyone. And we want to be a 100-year company. And so that letter set the expectations for the company. And we see this not just in climate and sustainability decision making at Shopify. We see it across the business. We will not sacrifice long-term outlook for short-term gains. And climate fits squarely in that bucket of something that has a longer time horizon that you cannot necessarily measure today, the effects on your business quarter to quarter. But you certainly, when you take a 100-year outlook, you can see how climate is going to affect our business. And as a commerce company, that happens, in two ways. One, we're focused on building entrepreneurship around the world. Those communities that need access to entrepreneurship are the ones that are also typically more affected by the effects of climate change than others. And so if we want entrepreneurship to be democratized around the world, we need to make sure that those who are going to be entrepreneurs are not being affected by floods, extreme weather events, dealing with water scarcity and high food prices. So that all comes from fighting climate change.
That's a daunting task. I mean, you talk about 100-year plan. Of course, there's a lot of existential angst right now about the immediate term and whether it's, achieving 1.5 degrees is the limit for rising temperatures, or obviously what you mentioned, the sort of climate disasters that we're seeing. How do you feel about it? You're on the front lines. You've worked in this space, both in the public and private sector. Are you feeling optimistic that we're getting where we need to go, or something different?
Yeah. So it's been a tough year in terms of the climate reality. It's touching everyone almost everywhere now, and we're feeling it and seeing it every day. And, I don't think you can sit where I am and not be my cups half full kind of viewpoint. Otherwise, you wouldn't get out of bed and go to work, right? So I think about it in terms of we have to focus on emissions reductions today. That is the one thing that has a result. Right now, the minute you do it, life is getting better, right? And so we really have to do those emissions reductions, and that has to be the priority. And then when I think about the 1.5 target, the likelihood that we're going to overshoot that increases every day. And that's the evidence that we're seeing in our lives, right? And so that's where I think about carbon removal. And, it's not available today at scale. It's expensive. There's all sorts of negative things about it. However, we are going to need that to pull us back down to 1.5 and to minimize that length of time of overshoot. So I feel like I think about the framing around carbon removal, and I see it as the escape hatch at the end, but not because we didn't do emissions reductions, but because overshoot is likely to happen and we need to have things in place that we can use when that occurs. It's not about one or the other, so doing both. And to address your part of the question around the increased impacts of climate change, I think that while awful and upsetting, I think is now showing to humanity that this is an urgent, pressing need, and everyone can relate to it. Like, we are an interesting species who will not take the steps to save ourselves until we are immediately going to die, right? We
Well,
saw that with the pandemic. We only
yeah,
act when it's urgent, and climate is this weird thing that we couldn't see, feel, or touch, but now we are.
it's interesting you mentioned the pandemic, because one of the things that has struck me, Shopify's been very much in the news and on the front lines of changing the culture around work as well. Whether it's been eliminating meetings, famously, I don't know, how that worked out. We've had, but, remote, just basically trying to pivot the culture. How has that helped you or changed the nature of your job when you think about the culture that essentially the company's trying to create?
So all of those, like the remote first approach to work and the digital technology component, because, as a remote company, you have to have world-class tooling, and that takes energy. So that really puts the focus for our emissions reductions plan on renewable energy. And so for us, it's not about going out and buying renewable energy credits on the commodities market. It's about making sure that we're doing our best to grow the amount of clean energy that's in the grid. So it's not just about replacing coal, it's about increasing capacity with clean energy projects. And like, we're not an overly large energy intensive company per se, but
Right.
we're finding new and creative ways where we have to partner, again, because we're not necessarily going to be able to buy the entire capacity of a new wind farm. We need to bring in two other users so that we can do something that has impact.
So, Stacey, I do have to ask, though, that now, again, this was at the beginning earlier this year of eliminating meetings, and I know that was an experiment. You're from government, which I associate with a lot of meetings. Are you having fewer meetings now? Have you become more effective? Just, take away the sustainability hat a second and just keep the Shopify hat on. How are you working differently?
It's my favorite. So the coming back after the winter break and having my calendar has like gone.
Gone. All your meetings were eviscerated.
Meetings gone. I mean, I see that it gets me excited, right? Because it's about subtraction, where you take away and then you see what grows back, and then what grows back is clearly what's necessary to do work. And so for me, I feel like that's a great
What's
way
grown
to
back
operate.
for you? What has grown back? I mean, give me a sense of how you're working differently now versus prior to the winter.
So for my team, there's a lot of debate when it comes to sustainability stuff. It's like, is this high quality? Could it be better? I mean, you talk about greenwashing and how can messaging be taken? So one of the things that works really well on my team, and I call it office hours. And what we do is anybody on the team can put together a brief. This is the problem. This is what I want to get out of this. And we do a 20-minute time boxed, problem solving session. Those have been a really amazing replacement for that weekly update meeting where you're like, here's what I'm working on this week. It's like you skip, here's what I'm working on this week, because you can do that asynchronous in
It's like
text.
debate of the week. It's almost like a debate of the week.
Totally.
That sounds very stimulating.
And it's fun because it accelerates our work, because I use it for okay, what's the most pressing thing we should work on? Somebody else will use it for, I'm not sure how to price this out, or I'm not sure how to proceed with this kind of comms messaging, or whatever it is. And it really focuses us in. It's almost like you take away that regular cadence of update meetings and replace that with a problem solving session. Now that's a way better use of time.
I want to end with some of the stakeholders you have. Let's start with the vendors. You are, I'm not sure if you're certainly one of the largest e-commerce platforms in the world, empowering so many people to basically create brands. How do you help them be more sustainable? What's the message to them? Because most people can't afford to go out there and have their own decarbonization plan. As you mentioned, it's expensive. So what tactics do you suggest to them or help them get where they want to go?
Yeah, so what we've done on our platform, because we do have that connectivity to all of these businesses around the world, and we've figured out a few things about reducing and measuring our footprint, buying high quality carbon removal, vetting those companies. And what we've done, rather than these small, medium, like micro businesses needing to have their own climate people and doing their own vetting, we're actually building into our product an offering that helps them understand their emissions. And then they can find paths to reduction, but also access the same high quality carbon removal credits that we use for ourselves without having to do all that contracting. So we're passing our knowledge on to them and helping them then connect with their customers who are increasingly more climate aware in their purchasing and want to buy from brands that align with their values. So it's kind of a two levels of value for our customers, is that they don't have to do it themselves. We can provide them with trusted tools, but they also then have that brand impact that they can communicate to their buyers.
What about for consumers? I live in New York, where the boxes pile up in people's doors, and there's been a lot more awareness around some of the waste and the cost, the consequences of our consumer culture. What are you doing there, and what's the message you give to consumers? Because obviously buying patterns are what fuel growth.
Definitely. And, because buying patterns are what fuels growth for our customers and for our brands, we try to help them understand what their customers want and who's buying their products and what are the demographics, right? There's a lot of data that's available to them. And, there's ways to make sure that you're serving to your customers the product they want. They're not ordering, a carpet, getting it shipped to their house and going, oh, that color doesn't match my living room. It doesn't look like the picture.
Send it back.
And then you've got returns. Returns are a huge issue, right? And so what it's about is having a high fidelity or high integrity commerce interaction where our platform is making sure that, what our merchant takes a picture of to put on their website is what goes all the way up and into the satellites and then back down onto, your customer's phone, and they go, oh yeah, that's the color of the shoes that I want. They know what they're getting, right? So that we can make sure that we're reducing the waste, because we are going to continue to buy. And that's not going to go away. Commerce has been a foundation of society since society started. So it's about finding ways to use our platform and that aggregation of our merchants and those brands to move commerce forward in a sustainable way.
Stacy, is there anything else on your radar that you would put on ours in terms of what you're keeping an eye on, or any other priorities that are bubbling up? We did not talk about generative AI. Every conversation involves that. But what's sort of on your immediate to-do list? Besides, of course, the overarching goal to decarbonize, which we know is necessary. Is there anything else that if you could, wave a wand and change it, you would change right now, or that you want us to be thinking about?
One thing that is a thread that goes through all of my work that I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how we can all do it better. It's about trust and integrity in what's going on, like in green claims, avoiding greenwashing. Greenwashing is not intentional. It's usually just a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding of the impacts of what different businesses are doing. So that is dominating a lot of the conversation right now because of the increased likelihood of regulations around that in different jurisdictions in the world. So I think a lot about how do we continue to move forward and drive change while talking about it in a transparent and factual way to make sure that we're maintaining that trust and integrity. Because if everything's always being, doing something that is better than doing nothing, and if we're always being told, well, that's not good enough, that's not greenwashing, it's better than doing nothing. So how do we create that cycle where people and companies and brands are empowered to go and make change, but not fearful of the accusations that can come along with it, but also, and I think when I think about it in that framing, it's about that education piece and not being afraid to go, we did this, we learned this, now we're doing it differently. And that's fine. And it is something that, we've seen less companies wanting to talk about what they're doing from a sustainability and climate angle because of the the criticisms, when it should be more of a, great, you're doing that, here's the next best thing, let's do that too, right? And it's a
Those
bit of
debates of the week.
yeah, exactly.
We should all do
How
that.
are we going to push that forward, right? And make sure that we're having progress in the right direction.
Great. Stacy, thank you very much. Obviously, look forward to continuing the conversation, and good luck. It's a big mission.
Thanks so much for having me, Diane.